Marcus Chen stood outside the Golden Hour, his own establishment, watching the neon sign flicker against the evening sky. The bar had been his latest acquisition, purchased 3 months ago through a shell company. He owned 17 restaurants across the state, each one a carefully calculated investment that had multiplied his fortune beyond what most people could imagine. But tonight, Marcus wasn't here as an owner. He was here to expose the truth about his employees. The idea had come to him during a business dinner when a colleague mentioned how staff behaved differently when management wasn't watching. Marcus had built his empire on reading people, on understanding their true nature beneath polished surfaces. He prided himself on his ability to see through pretense, and lately, he'd grown suspicious of the glowing reports from the Golden Hour's manager. Everything seemed too perfect, too rehearsed. He wanted to see what happened when someone appeared worthless, powerless, and poor. He'd spent the afternoon transforming himself. His usual tailored suits hung in his penthouse closet, replaced by torn jeans he'd bought from a thrift store. His designer watch sat in a safe, replaced by nothing at all. He'd rubbed dirt on his worn sneakers and hadn't shaved for 3 days. Looking at himself in a gas station bathroom mirror, Marcus barely recognized the disheveled man staring back. Perfect. The bar's interior glowed with warm amber lighting. Dark wood paneling lined the walls, and vintage photographs of the city hung in brass frames. It was a Tuesday evening, so the crowd was modest, mostly regulars nursing drinks and sharing quiet conversations. Marcus shuffled inside, adopting a hunched posture that made him appear defeated by life. He'd practiced this walk, studied homeless men on street corners, understood how poverty changed the way people moved through space. He chose a corner booth, away from the main crowd but visible enough to observe the staff. A young bartender polished glasses behind the counter, laughing at something a customer said. 2 servers moved between tables with practiced efficiency. And then he saw her. Sarah Mitchell carried a tray of drinks with the kind of grace that came from years of experience. She was probably in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that seemed to notice everything. Marcus watched as she delivered drinks to a table of businessmen, smiling genuinely at their jokes even though he could tell she'd heard similar ones 1,000 times before. When she approached his booth, her smile didn't falter despite his appearance. Most people's expressions shifted when they encountered someone who looked homeless, a microscopic tightening around the eyes, a slight step backward. Sarah showed none of these tells. "Good evening," she said warmly. "What can I get started for you?" Marcus had prepared for this moment. "Just water," he mumbled, not meeting her eyes. "Just water is fine." He watched her face carefully for any sign of disappointment or irritation. In his experience, servers hated customers who occupied tables without ordering real drinks or food. They took up space that could go to paying customers, reduced potential tips, and generally made shifts less profitable. But Sarah's expression remained open and kind. "Of course," she said. "I'll be right back with that." When she returned with a tall glass of ice water, complete with a lemon wedge, Marcus noticed she'd brought extra napkins and placed them within easy reach. "Here you go," she said. "Let me know if you need anything else, okay?" She started to turn away, but Marcus spoke up, keeping his voice uncertain and rough. "Miss, I don't have much money right now. But I was wondering if maybe you had any food that's about to be thrown out? Kitchen mistakes or something? I haven't eaten since yesterday morning." This was the real test. He'd phrased it carefully, making himself vulnerable, admitting poverty without directly begging. How she responded would tell him everything he needed to know about the culture he'd purchased along with this establishment. Sarah paused, and Marcus watched her processing his request. Her eyes moved across his face, taking in the scruff of his beard, the hollowness he'd created beneath his cheekbones by specific positioning of his jaw, the carefully calculated desperation in his expression. For a moment, he thought she might refuse, might call security, might respond with the cold professionalism that kept boundaries firmly in place. Instead, she smiled. Not a pitying smile, but something genuine and warm that reached her eyes. "You know what? Let me talk to the kitchen. I'm sure we can figure something out. Just give me a few minutes, okay?" Marcus nodded, maintaining his role, but internally he felt a flicker of surprise. She hadn't questioned him, hadn't asked for proof of his situation, hadn't made him feel small for asking. She'd simply accepted his need and moved to address it. He watched her walk toward the kitchen, stopping briefly to deliver drinks to another table. Even from across the room, he could see her laughing at something a customer said, her professionalism never wavering despite whatever she was arranging for him. This impressed Marcus more than he wanted to admit. In his experience, Most people compartmentalized their compassion, saving it for convenient moments when it didn't interfere with their primary responsibilities. While he waited, Marcus observed the bar's operations with his trained eye. The bartender worked efficiently but smiled less than the report suggested. One of the other servers seemed frazzled, forgetting which drinks went to which table. The manager sat in a corner booth going through paperwork, occasionally glancing up to survey the room. None of them had looked at Marcus twice. To them, he was invisible, a non-entity taking up space without contributing to the evening's profits. Sarah emerged from the kitchen 15 minutes later carrying a plate that made Marcus's carefully maintained hungry expression almost authentic. A thick burger sat beside a generous portion of fries, steam rising from both. She'd added a side salad and what looked like a slice of chocolate cake. "Here we go," she said, setting the plate down with a flourish. "The burger's a kitchen mistake. Customer ordered it medium rare, and it came out medium well, so they sent it back. The fries are fresh though. I told the kitchen to make new ones." Marcus stared at the plate, momentarily forgetting his performance. The burger wasn't a mistake. He'd worked in enough restaurants to know the difference between a rejected order and something prepared specifically for someone. The pristine presentation, the careful arrangement of garnishes, the generous portions told him exactly what had happened. Sarah had ordered this meal, probably planning to pay for it herself. "I can't," he started, his voice catching with unexpected emotion. "I can't take your money." Sarah sat down across from him, something servers generally didn't do with customers. "You're not taking my money," she said firmly. "This is a kitchen mistake that would have gone in the trash anyway. You're actually helping us reduce waste. So really, you're doing us a favor." The lie was transparent and beautiful. Marcus had built an empire on understanding subtext, on reading between lines, and he saw clearly what she was doing. She was giving him dignity, wrapping charity in practical reasoning so he wouldn't have to feel like a burden. The sophistication of this kindness struck him profoundly. "Thank you," he whispered, and for the first time since starting this experiment, his gratitude was completely genuine. "You're welcome," Sarah said, standing up. "Eat slowly, okay? There's no rush. Stay as long as you need." As she walked away to attend other customers, Marcus looked down at the meal. He'd eaten at Michelin-starred restaurants, had private chefs prepare elaborate tasting menus, had spent thousands of dollars on single bottles of wine. But this simple burger, given freely by someone who probably struggled to pay her own bills, felt more valuable than any of those experiences. He took a bite, and the food tasted like humility. He'd come here to test his employees, to catch them being cruel or indifferent, to justify whatever decisions he'd already half made about restructuring or replacing staff. Instead, he'd encountered something that made his carefully constructed worldview feel suddenly inadequate. Marcus watched Sarah move through the bar, noticing details he'd missed before. The way she checked on an elderly man sitting alone, making sure his coffee stayed full. How she patiently explained menu items to a couple who seemed overwhelmed by choices. The genuine laugh she shared with the frazzled server, some inside joke that helped ease the younger woman's stress. Marcus ate slowly, partly to maintain his performance and partly because he genuinely needed time to process what was happening. Each bite of the burger felt heavy with implications he hadn't anticipated. He designed this experiment to confirm his suspicions about human nature, to validate his cynical understanding of how people treated those without power or money. Instead, Sarah had dismantled his hypothesis with simple, uncomplicated kindness. Around him, the bar continued its evening rhythm. The businessmen at the corner table grew louder with each round of drinks. A young couple sat close together, their body language suggesting a first date. The elderly man Sarah had been checking on finished his coffee and left, waving goodbye to her with obvious affection. She waved back, calling him by name. "See you Thursday, Mr. Patterson." That small detail struck Marcus. She knew the regular customers by name, remembered their schedules, had built relationships that went beyond transactional service. This was exactly the kind of culture he'd hoped to find in his establishments, but he'd never thought to look for it this way, from the bottom up rather than the top down. When Sarah returned to check on him, Marcus had finished about half the meal. "How's everything tasting?" she asked, her tone genuinely interested rather than perfunctory. "It's perfect," Marcus said, and meant it. "Best burger I've had in a long time." Sarah beamed. "Jimmy's a great cook. He doesn't always get the credit he deserves." She glanced toward the kitchen with obvious respect. "Can I get you anything else? More water?" Marcus nodded, and she refilled his glass from a pitcher she'd brought over. As she poured, he noticed her hands. They were young hands but showed signs of hard work, small scars and calluses that came from years of physical labor. Her nails were trimmed short and practical, no polish. A simple silver ring on her right hand looked like it might be a family heirloom. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said, abandoning some of his pretense. His voice came out less rough, more curious. "Of course," Sarah said, setting down the pitcher. "Why did you help me? You don't know me. For all you know, I could be running some kind of scam." Sarah considered the question seriously, sitting down across from him again. This time, Marcus noticed her glance toward the manager's booth, a quick check to make sure she wasn't neglecting her duties. The manager was absorbed in his paperwork and didn't look up. "Honestly?" Sarah said. "Because I've been there. Not exactly in your situation, but close enough. 3 years ago, I was living in my car, working 3 jobs, trying to save enough for an apartment deposit. People were either really kind or really cruel, and I never forgot either type. The kind ones made me believe things could get better. The cruel ones made me determined to never make anyone else feel the way they made me feel." Marcus felt something crack in his chest. He'd made assumptions about Sarah based on her appearance, her job, her age. He'd catalogued her as a data point in his experiment. But she was a complete person with her own struggles, her own history, her own philosophy earned through actual hardship rather than abstract theorizing. "You lived in your car?" he asked, genuine surprise in his voice. Sarah nodded. "My mom got sick. Cancer. I dropped out of college to take care of her and help with bills. After she died, I had nothing left. No degree, no savings, just a lot of debt and a 12-year-old Honda Civic." "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and he was. Not the polite social sorry people offered reflexively, but a deep, genuine sorrow for suffering he'd been completely ignorant of. "It's okay," Sarah said. "It was actually a really important time for me. I learned what matters and what doesn't. Money matters, don't get me wrong. Having a roof over your head, being able to eat, those things are crucial. But kindness matters more than people realize. It costs nothing and can change everything." Marcus sat with those words, turning them over in his mind. He'd built an empire on the assumption that everything had a cost, that every transaction required balance, that kindness was either weakness or manipulation. Sarah was describing something different, an economy of compassion that operated outside his understanding. "How did you get back on your feet?" he asked. Sarah's smile turned sad but grateful. "A customer at one of my jobs, an older woman named Mrs. Chen, found out about my situation. She owned a house with a garage apartment and let me stay there for almost nothing while I saved up. She said someone had helped her once when she needed it, and she was just passing it forward. I lived there for 8 months, saved every penny, and finally got my own place." Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. "Mrs. Chen?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," Sarah said, her expression brightening at the memory. "Margaret Chen. She passed away last year, but I still think about her all the time. She used to say that money should flow like water, always moving, always giving life to whatever it touches. She was an amazing person." Marcus's hands gripped the edge of the table. Margaret Chen had been his mother. He'd known she helped people, had watched her give to various charities throughout his childhood, but he'd always viewed it as careless generosity, money thrown at problems without strategic thinking. After building his own fortune, he'd sometimes felt quietly superior to her approach, believing his calculated investments and business acumen represented a more sophisticated understanding of how the world worked. Now, sitting across from someone his mother had directly helped, someone who carried forward her philosophy of kindness, Marcus felt the full weight of his arrogance. His mother hadn't been careless. She'd been planting seeds that continued to grow long after her death. Sarah's kindness to him tonight was a direct result of his mother's kindness to Sarah years ago. The connection was so perfect, so circular, that it felt almost impossible. "Did you know her well?" Marcus asked, desperate to hear more, to understand his mother through someone else's eyes. "Pretty well, I think," Sarah said. "We'd have tea together on Sunday afternoons. She'd tell me stories about her life, about coming to this country with almost nothing, about building a business with her husband. She talked about her son sometimes, said he was brilliant and successful but had forgotten some important lessons along the way." Marcus felt heat rise to his face. His mother had talked about him, had identified his flaws even as she'd praised his accomplishments. "What kind of lessons?" he managed to ask. Sarah seemed to choose her words carefully. She said success isn't just about accumulation. It's about circulation. She said her son had learned to gather wealth but needed to remember how to share it, not just through donations or charity, but through genuine connection with people who have less. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. His mother had seen through him completely, had understood that beneath his financial success lay a poverty of spirit, a disconnection from the basic human bonds that gave life meaning. And here, in the most unlikely way, she was still teaching him, still trying to guide him toward becoming a better person. She sounds like she was an incredible woman, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. She really was, Sarah agreed. I tried to live by her example. That's why I helped you tonight. Mrs. Chen taught me that everyone has a story, everyone's fighting battles we can't see, and the least we can do is be kind. Marcus looked down at his half-eaten burger, this gift from a stranger that was really a gift from his own mother's legacy. He'd come here tonight wearing poverty like a costume, play-acting at struggle to test the morals of his employees. The exercise suddenly seemed grotesque, a violation of something sacred. Sarah, he started, then stopped. He wanted to tell her everything, to reveal who he was, to thank her properly for being exactly the kind of person his establishments needed, exactly the kind of person the world needed. But the words stuck in his throat. How could he explain his deception without destroying this moment, without making her feel betrayed or foolish for her kindness? Before he could decide, the manager approached their table. Sarah, you've been spending a lot of time with this customer, he said, his tone carrying an edge of warning. We have other tables that need attention. Sarah stood immediately, professional mask sliding into place. Of course, Derek. I was just checking on his meal. She turned to Marcus. Enjoy the rest of your dinner. Let me know if you need anything. As she walked away, the manager stayed behind, looking down at Marcus with barely concealed distaste. Listen, buddy, this is a business, not a homeless shelter. You can finish that meal, but then I'm going to need you to move along. You're making other customers uncomfortable. Marcus looked at the manager with new eyes. This was the same man who'd been sending glowing reports about the bar's operations, who'd been praising the team culture and customer service. But apparently, that culture only extended to customers who looked like they could afford to pay. I don't think I'm bothering anyone, Marcus said quietly, maintaining his disguise but allowing steel to enter his voice. Well, I think you are, Derek said. So finish up and go. Marcus watched Derek return to his booth, watched him settle back into his paperwork with the satisfied expression of someone who'd handled an unpleasant situation efficiently. Around the bar, several customers had noticed the interaction, their conversations pausing briefly before resuming. Sarah stood at another table taking an order, but her eyes kept flicking toward Marcus, concern evident in her expression. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Chen understood what it felt like to be judged solely on appearance, to be dismissed as worthless because of clothing and circumstances. The experience was enlightening and horrible in equal measure. Marcus sat in his booth for another hour, nursing his water and observing. Derek shot him several pointed looks, clearly annoyed that his order to leave had been quietly ignored, but didn't confront him again. Sarah continued working, checking on Marcus periodically with apologetic smiles that suggested she'd witnessed Derek's behavior and disapproved. Around 9 o'clock, the bar began to empty. The businessmen settled their tab and left, replaced by a quieter evening crowd. Sarah moved between tables with the same attentive care, but Marcus could see exhaustion creeping into her movements. She'd probably been on her feet for 8 hours or more, maintaining that warm smile and genuine interest even as her body screamed for rest. When she came to clear his empty plate, Marcus spoke before he could overthink it. Sarah, I need to tell you something. She slid into the booth across from him, and he noticed she did this naturally, as if customers were friends rather than transactions. What's on your mind? I'm not who you think I am, Marcus began, then stopped. The words felt inadequate, unable to capture the complexity of what had happened tonight. My name is Marcus Chen. I own this bar. I own 17 restaurants across the state. I came here tonight pretending to be homeless because I wanted to see how my employees treated people who couldn't benefit them. Sarah's expression shifted through several emotions: confusion, understanding, hurt, and finally something that looked like disappointment. You were testing us? I was testing you, Marcus admitted. And you passed in ways I never expected. But more than that, you taught me something I'd forgotten or maybe never really knew. What's that? Sarah asked, her voice careful. My mother was Margaret Chen. The woman who helped you, who let you stay in her garage apartment, who taught you about money flowing like water, that was my mom. Sarah's eyes widened. You're Margaret's son? She talked about you. she said. Sarah stopped, clearly remembering exactly what his mother had said, the criticisms wrapped in love. She said I'd forgotten important lessons, Marcus finished. She was right. I've spent 20 years building wealth and losing sight of why wealth matters. I thought success meant accumulation, control, staying above and separate from people who have less. Tonight, you showed me what my mother tried to teach me, that kindness circulates, that what we give comes back in unexpected ways, that real wealth is measured in connection, not just currency. Sarah studied his face, and Marcus let her look, let her see his sincerity without performance or pretense. Why are you telling me this? She finally asked. Because you deserve to know the truth. Because I'm ashamed of my deception. And because I want to change, but I need help. I don't know how to run businesses the way my mother would have wanted. I know how to maximize profits and minimize costs, but I don't know how to create the kind of culture where someone like you can thrive and spread kindness naturally. What about Derek? Sarah asked. He told you to leave. Derek is fired, Marcus said simply. Effective immediately. A manager who treats people differently based on their appearance has no place in my establishments. But more than that, I'm restructuring everything. I want you to help me. Sarah leaned back, surprise evident. Help you how? I want you to be the operations director for all my restaurants. I want you to help me build cultures where kindness isn't the exception but the rule. Where employees feel valued, where customers are treated like human beings regardless of how much money they spend, where my mother's philosophy becomes the foundation of how we operate. I'm a waitress, Sarah said. I don't have a business degree or management experience. You have something more valuable, Marcus countered. You understand what my mother tried to teach me. You've lived through hardship and emerged with your humanity intact. You know instinctively what creates good culture because you've survived bad culture. That's worth more than any degree. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing. This is a lot to take in. A few hours ago, I thought you were a homeless person needing a meal. Now you're offering me a job I'm completely unqualified for. You're the most qualified person I've met, Marcus said. You just don't know it yet. Think about it. Take time. But please, consider it seriously. Sarah nodded slowly. I'll think about it. But Marcus? If I do this, things will really change. I won't just be a figurehead saying nice things while business continues as usual. If you want the culture your mother would have wanted, that means treating employees well, paying living wages, creating opportunities for advancement, listening to people at every level. It means caring more about people than pure profit. I know, Marcus said. And that terrifies me because it goes against everything I've built my success on. But tonight, sitting in this booth, being treated like I was worthless by my own manager while being treated like I mattered by you, that taught me more about business than 20 years of profit margins and quarterly reports. My mother was right. I've been successful but empty. I want to change that. They sat in silence for a moment, the bar's ambient noise filling the space between them. Finally, Sarah extended her hand across the table. Okay. I'll try. But I'm warning you, I'm going to push back when you revert to old habits. I'm going to remind you constantly what your mother taught both of us. This won't be easy. Marcus shook her hand, feeling the calluses from years of hard work, the strength from years of survival. I wouldn't want it to be easy. Easy is how I ended up here, disconnected and testing people like they're experiments. I want difficult. I want to be challenged. I want to build something my mother would be proud of. Sarah smiled, genuine and warm. Then let's get started. But first, you're leaving a very generous tip. That meal you ate? I paid for it out of my own pocket, and waitress wages aren't exactly luxurious. Marcus laughed, the sound surprising him with its authenticity. He pulled out his wallet, his real wallet, which he'd hidden in his jacket, and placed $500 bills on the table. For the meal, for the lesson, and for agreeing to help me become the person my mother believed I could be. Sarah looked at the money, then back at Marcus. This is too much. It's not enough, Marcus said. It could never be enough. But it's a start. As he stood to leave, Marcus looked around the golden hour with new eyes. The warm lighting, the comfortable booze, the photos on the walls, all of it had been just property before, assets on a balance sheet. Now he saw it as his mother might have, a place where people gathered, where connections formed, where kindness could change someone's entire night or even their entire life. Outside, the night air felt different, cleaner somehow. Marcus Chen walked toward his car, no longer pretending to be poor but not quite the same wealthy man who'd arrived hours earlier. He'd come to test his employees and had ended up testing himself. He'd failed that test spectacularly, but failure, he was learning, could be the beginning of something better. His phone buzzed with messages from his assistant, his accountant, his various managers, all the apparatus of his empire demanding attention. For the first time in years, Marcus ignored them all. Instead, he opened his photos and found the last picture he'd taken with his mother, 2 years before she died. She was smiling at him with patient love, the same expression she'd worn throughout his childhood when he'd missed the point of her stories. "I'm starting to understand, Mom," he whispered to the photo. "It took me way too long, but I'm finally starting to understand." Tomorrow, he would begin the difficult work of transformation, of restructuring his businesses around principles instead of just profits, of learning to see employees and customers as complete human beings rather than elements in an economic equation. It would be hard. He would make mistakes. But for the first time since building his fortune, Marcus Chen felt like he was moving in the right direction, guided by his mother's wisdom and a waitress's simple, extraordinary kindness. The golden hour sign flickered behind him as he drove away, its light reflecting off the windows of his car like a promise or perhaps a benediction. Inside, Sarah was probably finishing her shift, counting her tips, planning for tomorrow. She didn't know it yet, but she'd saved more than just a hungry stranger tonight. She'd saved a man from his own emptiness, from a life of hollow success, from becoming someone his mother wouldn't recognize. And that, Marcus realized, was worth more than all his accumulated wealth combined.